Congresswoman Jasmine Crocket parked her modest hybrid sedan near the unassuming cafe Stars and Stripes. It was 7 a.m. on April 10, 2025, and her mind buzzed with thoughts of Judge James Boasberg, a federal judge whose recent rulings had triggered a political earthquake. For Americans over 55 who remembered the Watergate era and had seen the system teeter under the weight of scandal, this story would feel like déjà vu, but with a modern twist. Jasmine, a 44-year-old Democrat from Texas, wasn't the type to seek confrontation for the sake of headlines. Her career, from public defender to congresswoman, had been built on a stubborn belief in dialogue and justice. But this morning, her patience was wearing thin. A week earlier, she had received an anonymous envelope containing documents hinting at secret dealings by Judge Boasberg, actions that could jeopardize not only her political stance, but the integrity of the justice system itself. Inside the envelope were printed emails suggesting that Boasberg had secretly collaborated with high-ranking officials in the Trump administration to fast-track migrant deportations by bypassing judicial procedures. If true, the judge hadn't merely violated ethics, he had committed a crime. She stepped into the cafe, where the low hum of conversation filled the air, retirees with newspapers, local civil servants clutching coffee cups, and a few reporters hunting for early morning scoops. The wooden tables were worn, and the walls were adorned with yellowed photos of American flags and vintage presidential campaigns. The smell of frying bacon and strong coffee mixed with the faint scent of damp coats. Jasmine took a seat in the corner, ordering tea with lemon from an elderly waitress whose eyes crinkled with kindness. Her aide, 30-year-old Derek, was already waiting with a folder in hand. "Did you see this?" she asked quietly, nodding toward the documents he laid in front of her. Her voice was low, but it had steel in it. Derek, a slender man with a nervous habit of adjusting his glasses, nodded. "Yes, Congresswoman. If it's not a fake, Boasberg is knee-deep in the mud. But we need proof. Real proof, not just papers from some anonymous source." Jasmine pressed her lips together. She knew accusing a federal judge was no joke. Americans over 55 who had lived through the McCarthy era and seen how careless accusations could ruin careers would immediately suspect political revenge. But Jasmine wasn't seeking revenge. She wanted the truth. "I'm not going after him with fists, Derek. We're going to do this, right. Meeting someone who can confirm this, that's the first step," she said, sipping her tea. The hot liquid burned her tongue, but it helped her focus. Just then, the cafe door creaked open, and a woman in a gray coat stepped inside. Her name was Elaine Marshall, a 62-year-old retired attorney who had once worked in the D.C. District Court and knew Boasberg personally. Her silver hair was tied in a neat bun, and her eyes reflected a mix of fear and determination. She sat across from Jasmine, not removing her coat. "You said it was urgent, Congresswoman Crocket," Elaine began, her voice trembling but steady. "I don't like revisiting old cases, but if what you sent me is true, it's dynamite." Jasmine leaned forward, her dark eyes fixed on Elaine. "You worked with Boasberg. Is he capable of this? Circumventing the law for political goals?" Elaine sighed, her fingers nervously clutching the tablecloth's edge. James was always ambitious. Not in a bad way, but he valued order. If someone at the top convinced him this was about national security, he might bend the rules. "But I haven't seen proof. Not yet. What if I told you I have correspondence?" Jasmine lowered her voice to a whisper. "Emails where he arranges deportation flights with administration officials, even when court orders ban them?" Elaine froze. Her face paled, and her eyes widened. "Then he didn't just bend the rules, Jasmine. He shattered them. And if that's true, he could go to prison." The air at the table grew heavy, as if charged like the sky before a storm. Outside, cars hummed by, and inside the cafe someone laughed loudly at a tax joke. Jasmine felt her pulse pounding in her temples. She could run to the press right now, expose Boasberg, and light a firestorm. But that wasn't her style. She believed truth had power, when wielded wisely. "Elaine, I need your help," Jasmine said. Find someone who saw this firsthand. I want to talk to them. Not accuse, understand. Elaine nodded, though her gaze was uneasy. I'll try. But be careful. If Boasberg finds out you're digging, he won't sit idly by. He has friends, and not just in the courts. Jasmine smiled, a thin but resolute smile. I'm not afraid of shadows, Elaine. I shine light on them. Elaine stood, gave a brief nod of farewell, and left, leaving Jasmine and Derek in tense silence. Derek rubbed his hands nervously. What now, boss? Press? Committee? No, Jasmine replied, staring out the window where rain streaked gray lines on the glass. We go to the source. Find me someone from those flights. A witness. I want to hear what really happened. Later that same day, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting Arlington in orange hues, Jasmine stood beside her car, phone in hand. Derek had just sent a message. Found a guy. Juan Garcia. He was on one of the flights Boasberg allegedly authorized. Meeting tomorrow at 10 in Rock Creek Park. Her heart pounded. This was the beginning, the thread that might unravel the entire knot. But just then, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled out from an alley across the street. It passed by slowly, paused for a moment, then drove on. Jasmine felt a chill down her spine. She knew this wasn't a coincidence. Someone was watching, and the conflict she hadn't fully grasped yet was already unfolding. The next morning, April 11th, 2025, Rock Creek Park in Washington was full of life. The spring breeze pushed fallen leaves across the paved paths, and the first green buds were emerging through the bare branches of the trees. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles, and somewhere nearby, the muffled sounds of the city could be heard, the honking of cars and distant hum. Jasmine Crocket stood by an old wooden bench, holding a cardboard cup of coffee that had already cooled. Her dark blue coat fluttered in the wind, and her eyes were intently focused on the figure approaching along the path. Juan Garcia was a man in his mid-40s, of short stature, with broad shoulders and hands roughened from years of work in construction. His weathered, wrinkled face betrayed a hard life, but his eyes held a quiet strength. He wore a worn-out jacket and jeans and old sneakers that creaked with every step. Jasmine immediately understood that she was in the presence of someone who had seen more than he was willing to tell. "Are you Congresswoman Crocket?" he asked in a low voice with a slight accent. His English was clear, but it was obvious Spanish was his native tongue. "Yes, Juan. Thank you for coming," she replied, extending her hand. Her tone was warm but firm, like someone accustomed to having difficult conversations. He shook her hand, but his gaze was cautious, as if assessing whether he could trust her. They sat on the bench, and Jasmine noticed how he nervously clenched his palms. "Your assistant said this is about deportation." "About that flight," Juan began, his gaze drifting to the distance where two retirees were walking a dog. "I don't want trouble. I have a family, 2 kids. I've been here legally for 5 years, but—" "I'm not here to cause you trouble," Jasmine interrupted, her voice softening. "I'm here to understand what happened, and maybe help those still suffering." Juan sighed, his shoulders sagging as if shedding an invisible burden. "It was 2 years ago, July 2023. I was in a detention center in Texas, waiting for a hearing on my case. Everything was going fine. My lawyer said I had a chance to stay. But one night, they gathered all of us, about 40 men. No explanations. Just told us, pack your things, you're being transferred." Jasmine leaned closer, her eyes narrowing in tension. "And where were you transferred?" "On a plane," Juan replied, his voice trembling. "They took us to some small airport. No paperwork, no court orders. Just armed men in uniforms and a plane. I heard one of them say, 'It's an order from above.' Boasberg signed everything. I didn't know who that was, but I remember the name." A sharp pang hit Jasmine's chest. She knew that Judge James Boasberg had no authority to authorize such actions without due process. This was direct proof that the documents from the anonymous envelope weren't fabricated. But she didn't rush to celebrate. She needed the whole puzzle. "What happened next?" she asked softly. Juan rubbed his face with his hands, as if trying to erase the memories. "They sent us to Mexico. They dropped me off in Monterrey, though I'm from El Salvador. I begged them, said I had a right to a hearing, that it was a mistake. But they didn't even listen. One of the officers just laughed and said, 'Thank God you're still alive.' I stayed there for 6 months, until I found a way to return. My kids. They thought I was gone." His voice cracked, and he fell silent, staring at the ground. Jasmine felt both anger and compassion battling within her. She could call CNN or the Washington Post right now, expose the story, and air it. But that would destroy Juan. Press would tear his life apart, and Boasberg and his allies would use every resource to discredit the witness. No, she had to approach this differently. "Juan, I promise your story won't go public until you want it to," she said, placing her hand on his shoulder. "But I need your help. Was there anyone else who heard about Boasberg? Someone who can confirm?" He looked up, a spark of hope flashing in his eyes. "Yes. There was one guy, Raul. He heard the same thing, but he's still scared to speak. He was deported with me, but he came back a month ago. He lives in Baltimore." Jasmine nodded, her mind already forming a plan. "Give me his contact if you can. And thank you, Juan. You're braver than you think." He gave a weak smile, but doubt was evident in his eyes. They said their goodbyes, and Jasmine remained on the bench, watching as Juan disappeared around a bend in the path. Her phone buzzed a message from Derek. Elaine found another witness. Former Boasberg clerk. Meeting today at 3 p.m. Jasmine's heart raced. A clerk wasn't just a rumor. That was someone who could have seen documents, signatures, evidence. But with the excitement came a feeling of danger. The black SUV she'd seen the day before flashed back in her mind. Someone knew she was digging, and that someone was not pleased. Later that day, at 2:45 p.m., Jasmine sat in a small cafe in Georgetown, holding a cup of herbal tea. The place was cozy, with brick walls and shelves filled with old books. The smell of cinnamon and freshly ground coffee filled the air, and outside the window, the midday traffic hummed. She was waiting for Michael Reed, a 58-year-old lawyer who had worked as a clerk for Boasberg 3 years ago and had retired under mysterious circumstances. Michael arrived 5 minutes late. His graying hair was disheveled, and dark circles under his eyes showed the wear of years. He sat across from her, placing his briefcase on his lap, and immediately got to the point. "Elaine said you're asking about Boasberg," he began, his voice hoarse, as though from years of smoking. "I don't want to get involved, but I saw something, and it still gnaws at me." Jasmine set her cup down on the table, her gaze sharpening. "What exactly did you see, Michael?" He sighed, looking around as if checking if anyone was listening. In 2023, Boasberg was getting calls. Late at night in his office. I was working late, preparing documents. He thought I couldn't hear, but I could. Names, big names from the administration. They were talking about expediting the process, about how to clean up the system for migrants. One time, I saw a document on his desk, a deportation order signed by him. But he wasn't supposed to do that. The hearings hadn't even happened. Jasmine felt her pulse quicken. This was the key. "Do you have copies? Anything that can be shown?" Michael shook his head. "No, I didn't take anything. But I remember the dates. And I know where he keeps his files. If you can get to them." He stopped as the cafe door opened, and a man in a dark suit entered. His gaze scanned the room and stopped on them. Michael turned pale. "That's one of them," he whispered. "Boasberg's people." Jasmine turned around. The man sat at a far table, pulling out his phone, but his eyes kept darting back toward them. Her stomach tightened, but she showed no fear. "We'll finish this later," she said quietly to Michael. "Go home. I'll handle it." He nodded and quickly left, clutching his briefcase to his chest. Jasmine remained seated, finishing her tea with cold confidence. She knew she was approaching a point of no return, but she also knew that stopping was not an option. After meeting with Michael Reed, Jasmine Crocket returned to her office in the Capitol late in the evening on April 11, 2025. Washington was quiet, broken only by the hum of cleaning machines and the distant rumble of subway trains. Her office, cluttered with files and books on law, smelled of aged wood and a faint jasmine candle she had lit to calm her nerves. Outside the window, the lights of the Lincoln Memorial flickered, but Jasmine couldn't enjoy the view. Her thoughts were consumed by Michael's words, "He knows where the files are," and that man in the cafe, whose eyes seemed to pierce through her. She sat at her desk, unfolding her notes. Juan Garcia had given her a lead to Raul in Baltimore. Michael had hinted at evidence in Judge Boasberg's office. Elaine promised to find another insider. The puzzle was coming together, but every step brought her closer to the edge. Jasmine knew Judge James Boasberg was not just a corrupt official. He was part of a system that Americans over 55 remembered from the days of Nixon or even Reagan, a network of influence where truth was buried under the weight of power. Her phone buzzed. "Derek. Boss, I spoke with Raul. He's willing to meet, but only tomorrow evening. He says he's afraid for his daughter. She's still in school, and he doesn't want anyone to mess with her." Derek's voice trembled with tension. "Good, set it up. And check if anyone's watching him," Jasmine replied, her fingers tightening around the pen. "And Derek, be careful yourself." She hung up and leaned back in her chair. The thought of her own daughter, 19-year-old Aria, studying at the University of Houston, flashed through her mind. Jasmine hadn't seen her in 2 months, and now, with the stakes rising, her maternal instinct whispered, "Stop." But she brushed it off. Stopping meant betraying those like Juan, who had lost everything due to someone else's greed for power. The next day, April 12th, Jasmine headed to Baltimore. The drive was long, 2 hours through the Maryland suburbs, where cherry trees bloomed and lawnmowers buzzed. She turned on the radio, where an older host with a raspy voice discussed the latest news. The Boasberg scandal is gaining momentum. Congresswoman Crocket from Texas promises an investigation. But will this just be another political game? Jasmine turned off the radio. To people her age and older, those words sounded familiar, cynicism born from decades of disappointments. But she wasn't playing a game. She was fighting. The meeting with Raul was set at a small park by the Chesapeake Bay. The sun was setting, painting the water crimson, and the air smelled of salt and wet sand. Raul was waiting by the dock, a burly man with a short beard and an anchor tattoo on his forearm. His eyes were alert, but there was a quiet rage in them. "Are you Crocket?" he asked, not wasting time on pleasantries. "Yes. Thank you for coming, Raul," Jasmine replied, sitting on a bench next to him. Her voice was calm, but there was strength behind it. He nodded, but his hands trembled as he pulled out a cigarette and lit it. "I heard your name on TV. They say you're digging into Boasberg. Is that true?" "True," she said, looking him straight in the eye. "But I'm not just digging. I want to know what happened to you, and how we stop it." Raul exhaled smoke, his gaze clouding over. "They took me the same night they took Juan. A plane. No papers. I screamed I had the right to stay. I had a wife here, an American citizen. But they said, the judge decided. I heard one of them mention his name, Boasberg. I didn't know who he was, but I remembered. Then they dumped me in Guatemala. My wife. She couldn't handle it. Divorced me a year later." Jasmine clenched her fists in the pockets of her coat. Her heart ached for this man, but she didn't let her emotions take control. "Raul, if I can prove Boasberg broke the law, this could change everything. Not just for you, but for hundreds of others. Will you help me?" He was silent for a long time, staring at the water. Then he nodded. "I have a photo. Took it on my phone when they loaded us onto the bus. It shows an officer and some documents. I don't know if it'll help, but I'll give it to you." "This is a start," Jasmine said with a small smile. "Thank you." They exchanged numbers, and Raul walked away, leaving her alone on the dock. She checked her phone. Raul had sent a blurry photo, the silhouette of an armed man, and a sheet of paper with a seal. It wasn't ironclad evidence, but it was a thread that could be unraveled. That evening, back in Washington, Jasmine received a call from Elaine Marshall. Her voice trembled with excitement. "Jasmine, I found someone. A former IC agent who was involved in those flights. He's willing to talk, but only anonymously. Meeting tomorrow at the Mayflower Hotel, 9 o'clock. "You're a genius, Elaine," Jasmine replied, feeling the adrenaline surge through her veins. "I'll be there." But when she hung up, there was a knock at her office door. Jasmine opened it. Standing before her was the man in the dark suit, the same one she had seen in the cafe. His face was unreadable, but his eyes glowed with cold confidence. "Congresswoman Crocket," he began in a low voice, "Judge Boasberg wants to speak with you. Tomorrow at 8 o'clock in his office. He knows what you're doing, and he's offering a deal." Jasmine felt her stomach tighten, but she didn't look away. "Tell the judge I'll think about it," she replied calmly, though inside a storm raged. He nodded and left, leaving behind a silence as heavy as lead. Jasmine closed the door and leaned against it. A deal? That meant Boasberg was nervous. But it also meant he was ready to strike if she refused. She glanced at the clock, 10:47 p.m. Tomorrow would decide everything. The meeting with the ICE agent at 9 o'clock, and Boasberg's offer at 8 o'clock. She would have to choose. But Jasmine already knew she wouldn't back down. She wasn't just fighting for the truth. She was fighting for the people whose voices had been drowned out by the system. The wind howled outside, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. The storm was coming, and not just in the sky. The morning of April 13th, 2025, in Washington was gray and heavy. The sky was overcast, and the air smelled of rain that was about to pour. Jasmine Crocket stood before the mirror in her Arlington apartment, adjusting the collar of her dark green blazer. Her eyes, though tired from a sleepless night, burned with determination. Today was the day when everything was going to be decided, the day when she would either uncover the truth or become a target of the system she had been trying to change. She decided to attend both meetings. First at 8 a.m., with Judge Boasberg in his office at the federal courthouse. Then at 9 a.m., with the ICE agent at the Mayflower Hotel. Derek had insisted on security, but Jasmine had refused. "If I go with security, they'll think I'm afraid," she told him. And she wasn't afraid. Not now. Judge James Boasberg's office was spacious, with high shelves filled with legal tomes and a large window overlooking the rain-soaked streets. The judge himself, a 62-year-old man with graying temples and a cold gaze, sat behind a massive oak desk. His suit was impeccable, but there was tension around his eyes. Standing nearby was the same man in a dark suit who had visited Jasmine yesterday. His name was Thomas Crane, Boasberg's right-hand man. "Congresswoman Crocket," Boasberg began, his voice even, but with a hint of condescension. "I hear you're digging into my past. I don't understand why such a smart woman is wasting time on rumors." Jasmine sat down across from him, her posture relaxed, but her eyes kept a close watch on every move he made. "This isn't a rumor, Judge. This is testimony. People who were deported without hearings. Documents with your signature. Correspondence with the administration. I know what you did." Boasberg smiled, a thin, strained smile. "You overestimate your evidence. And you underestimate me. I'll make you a deal, end this investigation, and I'll guarantee funding for your projects in Texas. You want to help people, don't you?" Jasmine felt the anger rise in her throat, but she forced herself to breathe evenly. She leaned forward, her voice quiet but piercing. "Do you think I'll sell justice for budget dollars? I'm not here to bargain, Judge. I'm here to understand why you betrayed the law you swore to uphold." Boasberg's eyes narrowed. He nodded to Thomas, who placed a folder on the table. "This is all you have," Boasberg said. "Copies of your so-called evidence. We'll destroy them if you don't stop. And if you go any further, well, let's just say your career might end quicker than you think." Jasmine looked at the folder, but didn't touch it. She stood up, her voice calm, but with a strength that couldn't be ignored. I'm not afraid of your threats, and I won't stop. But I'll give you a chance, Judge. Confess, before the law, before the people. It's the only way out of this with any honor. Boasberg laughed, a short, sharp laugh. You're naive, Crocket. Go. But remember, you chose this path. She left the office, feeling her heart race. She had 30 minutes until her meeting with the IC agent. She knew Boasberg wouldn't back down, but neither would she. The Mayflower Hotel was packed with tourists and business people, but the small conference room on the second floor was quiet. Jasmine entered, holding her bag with the recorder inside. At the table sat a man in a baseball cap and dark sunglasses, former IC agent, whom Elaine had called John. His hands were folded on his chest, and his voice trembled with nerves. I don't want my name to be out there, he started. But I'll tell you everything. Boasberg gave orders. I was on those raids. He signed documents we didn't even show to lawyers. Hundreds of people just disappeared. Jasmine turned on the recorder, her voice soft but firm. Why did you decide to speak, John? He took off his sunglasses, and she saw his eyes, red from tears. I have a granddaughter. She's 5. I don't want her growing up in a world where this is possible. I stayed silent for 2 years, but I can't anymore. He handed her a flash drive. It's all here. Dates, names, orders. Do something with it. Jasmine clenched the flash drive in her hand, feeling warmth spread through her chest. This wasn't just evidence, it was the key to justice. Thank you, John. You've done more than you think, she said, her smile sincere. He nodded and quickly left, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Jasmine passed the evidence to the House Judiciary Committee, but she did so quietly, without any loud press announcements. She knew the scandal could destroy not only Boasberg, but also public trust in the courts. Instead, she arranged a closed-door meeting with key senators and judges, people who remembered how important it was to preserve the system, even when it was cracking. On April 26th, Jasmine stood before a small group in the Capitol conference room. Among them was Senator Tom Harris, a 68-year-old veteran from Georgia, whose voice rumbled like an old engine. Are you sure this isn't just a political game, Crocket? He asked, his brows furrowed. I'm sure it's the truth, Senator, Jasmine replied, placing the flash drive and the transcripts of Juan, Raul, and John's testimonies in front of him. But I don't want to destroy the courts. I want us to fix this together. Harris took the documents, his fingers trembling with age, but his eyes shone with understanding. If this is true, Boasberg's finished. But you're right. We need to do this quietly. 3 days later, Judge James Boasberg resigned, citing personal reasons. Officially, there was no mention of the deportations, but whispers in the halls of the Capitol suggested that Crocket had made the system work. Juan and Raul were allowed to file new petitions for the return of their families, and John received an anonymous thank you note from someone in Congress. On the last day of April, Jasmine sat in Rock Creek Park. She was sitting on the same bench where she had met Juan, holding a letter from her daughter Aria. Mom, I'm proud of you. You showed that truth still matters. The sun pierced through the clouds, and a light breeze carried cherry blossom petals across the grass. She hadn't completely beaten the system. Boasberg had avoided court, and many deported people never returned. But she had taken the first step, and that was enough. Somewhere in the distance, a train honked, and Jasmine smiled. The storm had passed, leaving behind not just ruins, but hope. For Americans 55-plus who had witnessed their country endure crises and revive, this was a moment of euphoria, not loud, but deep. Jasmine proved that one voice, armed with calm and truth, could change more than an army of screamers. And who knows what comes next?